a lot of the investors who were talking to us, but kind of not moving fast enough. And I said, look, we got this guy who might take up the entire round. And all of a sudden, everybody started moving, right? And that was an important lesson where the number one emotion that drives people's decisions is...
Welcome to the top.
Oh, yeah.
We killing annual quotas. It's the 1%er show, in case you haven't noticed.
Welcome to the top. I'm your host, Paul Salamanca, VP of Sales at SecurityScorecard, co-founder of the Top 1%er.
And I'm Tom Bocard, SVP Sales at Global Data and co-founder of the Top 1%er.
Tom has been a great co-host. And speaking of great, we have a great special guest today, Dr. Aleksandr Yampolskiy, co-founder and CEO of SecurityScorecard, a cybersecurity company that's valuation is trending north of $1 billion. So Alex came to the US, he was just saying, at 14 years old, lived in New York since, and he didn't waste any time. He did his Ph.D. in cryptography from Yale University. He's a former CISO, CTO, formerly worked at crazy companies like Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, Oracle. He's also an angel investor to startups. So Alex is very familiar with adversity and growing startups. So Alex, pleasure. Thanks for joining the show. If you don't mind telling us a little bit about how you actually started SecurityScorecard and co-founded that. Was it started off as a side hustle? Did you quit your job and know you were going into this full time?
A great business starts out of somebody seeing a problem, right? Like you see a problem and you're like, there's got to be a better way of doing it. So you look at many businesses like Google. The founders of Google just thought that the other search engines kind of sucked. So they thought there's got to be a better way to do it. And they came up with a way. And so similarly for SecurityScorecard, when I used to be a chief security officer at Guild Group, my marketing team would go sign up for all kinds of cloud companies. They would store their files in Dropbox. They would sign up for Marketo to rate marketing leads. And then they would just notify me as a CISO, and I would always kind of scratch my head and think to myself, I could get fired due to circumstances outside of my control. And the only way I really knew how to vet the security of all these other companies was by sending them a pen and paper questionnaire. Like there was no other way. And so back then in 2014, I really wanted to get back together with Sam, who used to be my kind of coworker at Guild. And we really just wanted to do something together, right? And we felt like there's got to be a better way to solve this problem of figuring out and measuring security back, which we faced at Guild. And so like rule number one for starting a business is you got to start it with somebody that you actually like, right? Like it's a little bit of a counterintuitive rule because a lot of the time people look for business partners with amazing skills, like this person is a top salesperson in the world, etc., but they actually don't know him as a human being and as a friend. And that's a mistake. You need to work with people that you really enjoy and that you like, because there's going to be so many hard moments together that if you actually just enjoy being with each other as a person, as an acquaintance, as a friend, you're going to get through it. And if you're with a person where you're not a friend, but is just a good kind of a expert, you don't know if you're going to stick around together. So rule number one, do it with people that you like. If you're trying to start a business and your idea is obvious to everybody you talk to, they're like, yeah, it's a great idea. And don't talk to your friends because they'll be nice to you. So talk to the people, that you don't really know.
Yeah.
And then if everybody tells you it's an obvious idea, actually you're probably too late to the game, because a true entrepreneur is going to find an idea where the idea is not yet obvious to other people. And then you're going to create the market and really expand the market and make it big. So like right now, when everybody was doing Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, I knew it's a bubble because, if everybody's talking about it, it's too late to the game. You want to go after things where they're not obvious to a lot of people, and that's really how you win. Back in 2013, we had this idea. Some people said it was a good idea. Some people some people said it was like an okay idea. So I started incubating it on a weekend, on evenings, which kind of sucked, right? Because everybody after work, and I'm working full-time as a CTO in another company.
Yeah. Are you married at this point, Alex?
Oh yeah, I was married. I had 2 kids. I had a mortgage. And I was working a full-time job. And after a long day, you want to rest. You want to spend time with your friends. You want to go get a beer. And kind of coming home at 11 o'clock after you put your kids to bed and beginning to like incubate this idea. I mean, it kind of sucks because you don't have a life and you get exhausted and tired. And so we're doing it. Then after a while, I go talk to my mentor, Kevin Ryan, who was a founder of MongoDB, Guild. I used to work for Kevin. And he tells me, Alex, if you really want this idea to be ever successful, you cannot be working on it part-time. You have to be working on it full-time. If you ever wanted to succeed, you can't have it as a side hustle. You got to be fully dedicated to this. That was his advice to me. So I'm like, shit.
Do you think that's good advice, Alex?
Well, so that was the dilemma. I'm like, wait a second. Like, I'm passionate about it, but I mean, I'm earning a salary. It's a good paycheck. I can't just afford to quit my job with a mortgage, 2 kids. How do I solve the problem? What do I do? So I'm like, I love my side hustle. It seems to be like it's beginning to pick up, but I can't afford to just go quit my job. And I got this contradictory advice. You got to do it full time to succeed. So I'm like, okay, well, I got to raise money. The problem is I don't know any investors. So like, where do you look investors? So I went on Google and I found a meetup group which said speed dating for like investors and entrepreneurs, where you get to pitch each of the investors for 5 minutes. So I registered and I showed up. I paid $20. I registered. There's like 10 investors sitting and 200 entrepreneurs, all with different ideas. I'm like, this is bullshit. This is like, if I were a single guy, it's like going to a bar where there are 200 guys and 10 women. Like the odds are not in your favor. That's not the bar you want to hang out with, figuratively speaking. So I walked out, but I wrote down everybody's names. Like I wrote down the names in the agenda of all the investors, and then I just later reached out to them on LinkedIn. And all of a sudden now I'm getting, instead of 5-minute meetings where I was part of a crowd, I'm getting 40-minute meetings with each of them. And I'm like, okay, and I got excited. I'm like, look at me, I'm so smart. Mr. Ph.D. from Yale, former CISO. People are just gonna throw me money, right? Like I figured out a hustle of how to get in front of them.
I figure I'm sure you're not the only one that tried to go offline and reach out to these people.
Oh, it's just a BDR job, right? Like I would use my LinkedIn relentlessly. I would like basically come up with a list of all the companies, all the investor companies that invest into cybersecurity. I get the names from their website, and then I'm like, okay, Tom is my second connection to this guy, and then Paul is my second connection, and then some other guy is my second connection. So I would just email like all 3 of you separately to maximize my chances, because I figured Paul will ignore my email, Tom will ignore my email, but somebody else might introduce me. So I just like basically relentlessly worked LinkedIn, and then I started getting introduced to all these investors and showing them my prototype.
Oh, no. So you weren't going straight to the investors. You were trying to leverage like referrals.
Oh yeah, I was using social proof, because if somebody introduces me and recommends me, then it kind of comes more validated versus just a cold email, right? Like, I would say, hey, Paul, can you tell him Alex is a smart entrepreneur. He used to work at Goldman Sachs. He did his PhD at Yale. You should take a meeting with him.
It's your first pitch, first rejection. What do you feel like at this point?
Oh, it sucks. You start doubting yourself. I'm like, wait a second. I spent 5 months on weekends, evenings, incubating this. Like, what am I doing? Maybe I should just go get another higher paying job, right? Like, but...
How long does that feeling last, Alex? Or how long did it last for you?
A day, right? Like, because, I kind of came to New York with $0 in my pocket. So on week 1, we're in an empty apartment and we have no furniture. So my dad and I walking on the streets of Brooklyn, picking up furniture from garbage that other people threw out. And so you just have grit basically. You have to suck it up and then you just keep going.
Yeah, I love it. So a day, you feel bad for like a half a day. And you're back at it.
So this guy rejected me and says, hey, like, you're not gonna market yourself. Like, I'm lucky. So I go to the second guy and I preemptively incorporate an objection. I give him the same pitch and I say, and here's how I'm gonna market myself. So he rejects me for a different reason. He's like, I don't know if you're gonna really build the product. So he rejected me. So I go to the third guy and say, here's my product roadmap. Here's how I'm gonna market myself. He rejects me for yet another reason. Every time I keep getting rejected, I keep preemptively incorporating it into my pitch, yet after dozens and dozens of meetings, it's still not working. So at that point, you really kind of begin doubting yourself. Then I got introduced to one investor, and I went into his office, and I decided, you know what, I might be kind of like, honestly, I might be trying too hard, right? Like, I'm like, instead of sitting down with my computer and a slide deck, let me just go invite him for a walk, right? And like, so we go for a walk, and I'm like, screw it. I've already gotten rejected so many times that I'm just gonna talk to the guy and get to know him as a person. And we actually kind of like bonded, and and it was a good conversation. At the end of a conversation, he looks at me and says, like, I love your idea. I want to invest. I'm like, well, I've not even told you my idea. Let me actually tell you what I'm doing. And so then he tells me, well, I'd love to invest, but Alex, there's one problem. Like, my venture partner embezzled all the money. So I'm like, what the hell just happened? I just met this investor for the first time. It felt like an amazing meeting. He said that he wants to invest. And then at the end of a meeting, he revealed to me something uncomfortable. And then on top of it, he has no money to invest. So I'm like, what the heck? And then he gave me a great advice. He said, you should use my name. You should tell people that I am considering taking up the round. And so I started going back to a lot of the investors who were talking to us, but kind of not moving fast enough. And I said, look, we got this guy who might take up the entire round. And all of a sudden, everybody started moving, right? And that was an important lesson where the number one emotion that drives people's decisions is fear. Fear of making a mistake. You don't want to make an investment decision into something that's going to lose your money, but also fear of missing out on a great opportunity. So fear is a very powerful motivator. And so then the rest of the story is we found an amazing investor who understood cybersecurity. They led our seed stage. They're fantastic. We love them. And we filled up the round with other seed investors. And then I was able to quit my job. I had to cut my salary 3 times from being a highly paid exec to being a CEO of a seed-funded startup. So every time I would go to Whole Foods on a weekend, my savings account would get smaller and smaller. But at the same time, I was doing something that I loved full-time, and it was really fun and satisfying. And then the rest is kind of history.
What's a kind of salary that's acceptable to investors for a co-founder?
Well, look, I mean, it's a discussion, right? Like, I think when you're starting your seed startup, right? Your main upside is equity, right? Like, your main upside is the equity of your startup being successful. So you don't want to be starving as a founder, right? Like, because if you're starving and you're not able to afford kind of like with certain things, then you're not going to be able to be a great leader, right? Like, in order to be a great leader, you need to be comfortable.
Yep.
But you're not going to be making a lot of money. If you do a typical seed investment of, let's say, $2 to $5 million in the seed round, and you are, like, for example, a CEO of a company and you're a founder, like, I don't think you should be paying yourself more than $180K base, and that's it. No bonus. Yep. Like, yep. I don't think you should be making more than 180, right? Like, I was paying myself 100K, right? Yeah. Like, at the time.
In New York City.
In New York City, yeah. My wife
with the family, yeah.
Yeah, my wife was working, so that's why I was able to do it. Yeah, look, I think as a company scales, is the company successful, you're going to raise your salary, etc. And you shouldn't expect the same always from people who join you at an early stage, right? But I think the people that you recruit at an early stage are going to have to value the equity more. And if you're looking for like cash, then yeah, later stage companies, later stage startups are more appropriate.
Can you mention one specific hard time where you remembered, holy shit, my back is against the wall. This is tough. I don't know if we're going to be, if this is even worth doing. Was there that moment in Security Scorecard or any other time? And then how did you overcome that?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think you have tough moments every single week, right? Like, I mean, the thing about companies, I mean, it all looks amazing in the press and it all looks kind of like so easy. But I mean, in reality, as the company scales and it gets bigger, it only gets harder. It never gets easier, right? Like it only gets harder every single day that you're successful. It gets harder the next day, right? And I'm in San Francisco and I'm feeling stressed and my psychological game is clearly manifesting because I'm talking to people and I'm getting all these rejections. And on top of it, like I know I have to figure out how to raise around in the next couple of weeks and I get sick with a bad flu. So I have like 100-degree plus fever. I'm feeling completely miserable. There were a couple of key executives who quit right around the same time because I wasn't dedicating them attention as a manager. So I'm like, shit, I'm feeling horrible. My game is terrible. I'm clearly manifesting it wrong. On top of it, like there are a few key people who left in the worst time possible. So I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I'm a complete failure, right? Like maybe I should just quit. And then the next day, kind of again, like I took Advil, shook it off, and got the work done. But I mean, those moments happen all the time, right? So I think resilience, I mean, it's almost like calluses, right? Like you work out calluses where just, you know, like the first time it happens to you, you're like, oh shit, right? Like you churned your big customer, your customer canceled the contract because they weren't satisfied, or you're working on a deal and it's like a deal that your entire quarter is riding on. And then all of a sudden, like at the last week of a quarter, you discover that, I mean, something changed, right? And they didn't buy from you and you miss your entire quarter. And like the first time it happens to you, like, crap, like this is horrible. But then after you get exposed yourself to like situations and you deal with it, you get stronger and stronger. And you just learn how to not let the highs get you too high and how not to let the lows get you too low in business.
I love it.
Honestly, having a partner or a friend or a family member who is like your sounding board and you know that they truly have your best interests in mind, right? They want what's best for you. And that's why it's so important that your business partner is somebody that you like, right? I mean, just honestly, that's why I think it's really, really hard to be a solo founder. If you're just by yourself and you don't have a co-founder, it's very, very hard. You need to really have a friend and a sounding board, and a friend who is not always going to agree with you, but a friend who is going to hold you accountable, tell you that you're wrong, disagree with you, and this way you're going to make the best decisions.
A lot of the founders I talk to and hear about these people starting up businesses, they're typically, you know, they're either married with no kids or they're single. Seems to be it. So you were doing all this with the full-time job on the weekends at night and you had 2 kids. Like it sounds great, like your wife was in your corner and all that stuff, but like did you like kind of play it out with her and be like, this is gonna be something that's big, and she kind of was bought in from you? And like how'd you balance that?
Life presents you ideas, opportunities, and then I mean the time is never perfect, right? Like the time to do anything is never perfect, right? Like the time to get married, the time to have children, like do you wait until you're a perfect parent to have children? No, it just happens and then you kind of figure it out. So no, I think it's I mean, I think you have to be upfront with each other, with your partner, with your spouse, and they need to be supportive and they need to know what it's going to be like, right? But the important part is also not to do it because of money, right? Like it's a little bit counterintuitive, but like, you know, if you're like, oh, I'm only doing it because I want to make money, like there are easier ways to make money than being in a startup, right? Like starting a startup is probably the worst way to make money in some ways, because if you look at statistics, like 99% of startups fail, right? Like you can make a lot more money being a CRO in a company, like working for a big 4 consulting firm. It's less risk. You got to do startups because you actually love the problem, right? Like if you love what you're doing you're like, I really want to figure out this problem. I'm really passionate about finding a way to solve it. Then if you're going to love it, you're going to be passionate to keep pushing forward. You're going to be more greedy. You're going to persevere. If you're doing it for money, you're going to quit when things turn tough. But when you're doing it because you love it, like, look, I mean, you guys love sales. Like, I love cybersecurity. So which books are we going to read on a weekend or vacation? We might read leadership books, cybersecurity books like Challenger Methodology or something like that. And it's not considered work to us because we are trying to get better. We enjoy it. We have fun while doing it. And when you love what you do, you're going to outwork anybody else by default. And so that's why it's so important to love the idea and go for it, not because of money, but because you love it, because then you're going to outwork anybody and you're going to be passionate about it and you're going to persevere.
In the audience, they actually asked, Calvin asked this, saying, what would be your best advice, kind of to, I guess, maintain more in the middle and not have the highs so high or the lows so low? Alex.
So you got to make sure you dedicate time just to yourself, right? You spend your time at work, then you come home, you spend time with your family, but you got to make sure you have time just for yourself, even if it means taking a day off just for yourself, right? And figuring out which things make you happy, right? So like I used to have a routine, like, I would drop off my kids to school, I would go to a coffee shop every morning, have a coffee, then I would go to like a fitness boot camp, and like I would never schedule meetings before 10 a.m. because like 8:30 to 9:30 was my sacred time where I want to make sure I work out. Like, and I don't care what's happening, like I gotta stay true to myself. Because if I'm happy, then I become more productive.
Yep.
And one of my former board members, Tom Mendoza, he gave me actually advice. And he said, imagine I can give you a gift, right? Any car you want. Like you pick any luxury car that you want. Rolls-Royce, Lamborghini, whatever car. And then you get to decorate the inside of a car in the best way. You put the best stereo system, the best leather, whatever you envision. And I just gave you this car. But the caveat is you only get to keep one car for your entire life. How good of a care are you going to take care of it? Are you going to take it up for a tune-up? Are you going to, overdrive it? So that car is your body, right? Like we're given only one body, and sometimes we drive hard. Sometimes we have to drive hard, right, at the end of a quarter. But it's really important to set up time for personal growth, for health, for seeing your friends, because if you're not happy internally, you're not going to be a good husband. You're not going to be a good coworker. Yeah. Like you have to be selfish and you have to find time to do what's good for yourself. So I work super hard, but I take 5 to 6 weeks of vacation a year, which sounds crazy, right? For a CEO of a startup. Yeah. But, it's very important. I go to Cape Cod with my kids in the summer for like at least 3 weeks. I travel with my wife, I'm a big believer that people should be measured not by how many hours they work, but by the results they produce. So work very hard, but also make sure that I take at least 5 weeks of vacation every single year. It's very important.
What's a piece of advice that you've received that, has never left you, that's had that major impact, on your, whether it's your career or just personal life, Meta?
Well, I think, I think that I've received many pieces of advice, right? It's a bit of a cliche advice, right? Like everybody has heard it, but again, the best tennis player in the world, like Roger Federer, he has a coach, right? Like, so it's not because he's a bad tennis player, it's because he wants to get better and better and better and better. And so the best advice is you really need to surround yourself with mentors, coaches, and it really served me well, right? Because as a CEO, or for example, as an executive, head of marketing, head of sales, if you are head of sales in a company of up to 2 million, that's a totally different head of sales than 2 to 10. 10 to 20, totally different than 20 to 50. 50 to 100, totally different. So you almost have to, figuratively speaking, fire yourself and reinvent yourself at every stage to make sure that you know how to get to the next level. So the best advice is you really need to surround yourself with a group of mentors, coaches that you can talk to who really will teach you what to expect.
Amen. I love
Great
that.
advice, man. That's I've found that as you kind of find those people, and you know, some of them you find by accident, right? You kind of stumble across them, but the impact they have it's immeasurable.
And honestly, a lot of the time, you don't need to have always a coach. You can learn by just observing. Like, look, I mean, I used to work for one guy, and at one of the companies, we had to do a round of layoffs. And he said, I'm Alex, you take care of it. And I'm going to my house in Hamptons to decompress and kind of take a break while you take care of it. I'm like, well, these people don't even report to me. They report to you. Like, shouldn't you be in front, owning the message and being accountable for it? So I did it. It sucked. But like, I learned just like, never do it again. That's a terrible idea. Like, if you're a leader, you need to deliver upfront and personal to your people good news and bad news. So a lot of the time you work for a company and you observe good things, and then you observe things and you're like, well, I would never do it. So like, that person who is doing it, that's just a bad thing. And so you learn a lot by observing the good and the bad.
Very true. Very true. Alex, man, you've been one of my favorite guests so far on the show, and I'm not just saying that because you're my boss's boss, but because of your journey and how transparent you've been. And that's one of the things that you preach also to the entire company, is to be transparent, even to our customers. And I love how you encourage, your company to take risks, think big, make it okay to fail, experiment. It's a pleasure to work for you, Alex, and thanks for coming on the show. And I want to thank all of you for joining Alex Yampolskiy, Tom Bocard, and myself, Paul Salamanca, today. See you next Thursday at 6 o'clock. As a wise man, Nas, once said, why shoot the breeze about it when you could be about it?
Welcome to the top.
Oh, yeah.
We killing annual quotas. It's the 1%er show, in case you haven't noticed.